Jake Morrison sat in the corner of the school cafeteria, his lunch tray pushed aside to make room for his notebook. He was drawing again, his pencil moving across the paper in careful lines. This time it was a new design for a faster spaceship. Engine. The math was probably wrong, but he liked to imagine what it would be like to fly between the stars. The cafeteria was loud as always. Students talked and laughed around their tables, but Jake barely heard them. He had learned long ago that it was easier to focus on his drawings than to try to join conversations. Most of the time, people forgot he was even there. "Hey, Jake, did you hear the news?" Nick sat down across from him, his friend Casey right behind him. They were the only two people who regularly talked to Jake, and he was grateful for that. Jake looked up from his drawing. "What news?" "We're getting an alien student," Casey said, excitement clear in her voice. "First one ever at Lincoln High. Principal Davis is going to announce it any minute." Jake raised his eyebrows. Everyone had heard about the Galactic Council's new program. After years of careful diplomacy, they had agreed to let alien students attend human schools. It was supposed to help both species understand each other better. But Jake had never thought it would happen at his school. "Really? Here?" Jake asked. "Yep, my mom works in the office, and she told me this morning," Nick said. "Apparently the student arrived yesterday." As if on cue, the cafeteria speakers crackled to life. Principal Davis's voice filled the room, and gradually the students grew quiet. "Attention, students," the principal said. "I have an exciting announcement. As part of the new Galactic Exchange Program, Lincoln High has been selected to host our first alien exchange student. Please join me in welcoming our new student to our school community." The cafeteria erupted in whispers and excited chatter. Jake looked around, trying to spot anyone who might be the alien student. He had seen pictures of different alien species on the news, but he had never met one in person. "I wonder what they look like," Casey said, leaning forward. "Probably just like us," Nick replied. "Most of the species in the council are pretty similar to humans, right?" Jake was about to respond when the cafeteria doors opened. A girl walked in, and Jake knew immediately that she had to be the alien student. She looked human, but there was something different about her. Her skin was pale, almost silver in the right light. Her hair was dark and straight, falling to her shoulders, but it was her eyes that really stood out. They were a deep violet color that Jake had never seen before. The girl stood at the entrance, holding a tablet and looking around the room with an expression that Jake recognized well. She looked nervous and uncertain, the same way Jake felt in most social situations. Several students from the popular table got up and walked over to her. Jake watched as they introduced themselves, their voices loud and friendly. The girl smiled politely and nodded, but Jake could see that she was uncomfortable. After a few minutes, she politely excused herself and walked away from them. She moved through the cafeteria slowly, looking for an empty table. Jake noticed that she walked differently than most people. Her steps were careful and precise, like she was always ready to move quickly if she needed to. It reminded him of the way soldiers moved in movies. Jake went back to his drawing, but he kept glancing up at the girl. She had found a table near the windows and was sitting alone, looking at her tablet. She seemed to be reading something, but Jake could tell she was also watching the room around her. "She's pretty," Casey said, following Jake's gaze. "Yeah," Nick agreed. "But she looks kind of intense." Jake didn't say anything, but he knew what Nick meant. There was something about the girl that suggested she was much more than just a nervous exchange student. The way she held herself, the way her eyes moved around the room, even the way she sat. It all seemed very controlled and purposeful. Jake was so lost in thought that he didn't notice when the girl got up from her table. She was walking toward the exit when her tablet slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. It landed right next to Jake's table. Without thinking, Jake reached down and picked it up. The girl had stopped and was looking at him with those unusual violet eyes. Up close, Jake could see that her skin really did have a silver tint to it, and her features were slightly sharper than a typical human's. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. She had a slight accent that Jake couldn't place. "No problem," Jake replied, handing her the tablet. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and Jake noticed that her skin was warmer than he had expected. The girl looked at him for a moment longer, then glanced at his drawing. "That's a spacecraft," she said. Jake felt his cheeks get warm. "Yeah. It's just I like to draw them. It's not very good." "Actually, it's quite good," she said, studying the drawing more carefully. "The engine design is interesting, very efficient." Jake blinked in surprise. Most people just saw his drawings as random scribbles. But this girl seemed to actually understand what she was looking at. "I'm Jake," he said, suddenly feeling brave. "I'm Zara," she replied. "I'm the new student." "I figured," Jake said, then immediately felt stupid for saying it, but Zara just smiled slightly. "Is it that obvious?" "The eyes," Jake said honestly. "They single quotes read ... different, but in a good way." Zara touched her face self-consciously. "I was told they might draw attention." Jake noticed that she looked tired, and he remembered how overwhelming his first day at Lincoln High had been. That had been 3 years ago, and he was human. He couldn't imagine how difficult it must be for someone from another planet. "Would you like to sit down?" Jake asked, gesturing to the empty chair at his table. "I mean, if you want to." "You don't have to." Zara looked at the chair, then at Jake, then at Nick and Casey, who were watching the conversation with interest. For a moment, Jake thought she was going to say no, but then she nodded and sat down. "This is Nick and Casey," Jake said, introducing his friends. "Hi," Nick said, grinning. "Welcome to Lincoln High. It's not much, but it's home." "Thank you," Zara said politely. "Everyone has been very welcoming." Casey leaned forward. "What's your home planet like? Is it very different from Earth?" Zara paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "It's quieter than here, more structured, less chaotic." "Chaotic is a good word for this place," Nick laughed. "Especially during lunch." Jake noticed that Zara was sitting very straight, and her eyes kept moving around the room. She was watching everything like she was expecting something to happen. It made him curious about what kind of life she had led before coming to Earth. "Are you taking any advanced classes?" Jake asked. "Several," Zara replied. "Physics, mathematics, political science. I'm particularly interested in engineering and military strategy." "Military strategy?" Casey asked. "That's not usually a high school subject. It's an elective at my school on..." "Back home," Zara said quickly, "we study many different subjects." Jake noticed the slight hesitation in her voice, but he didn't push. He knew what it was like to feel like you didn't fit in, and he didn't want to make her more uncomfortable. The lunch bell rang, and students began clearing their tables. Zara stood up, gathering her things. "Thank you for letting me sit here," she said to Jake. "It was nice." "You can sit here any time," Jake said, surprising himself with his boldness. "I mean, if you want to..." Zara looked at him for a moment, and Jake thought he saw something soften in her expression. "I would like that," she said as she walked away. Jake watched her go. There was definitely something unusual about Zara, something that went beyond just being from another planet. But for the first time in a long time, Jake was looking forward to tomorrow's lunch period. "I think she likes you," Casey said with a grin. Jake felt his face get warm again. "She was just being polite?" "Maybe," Nick said, "but she seemed pretty." "Interested in your drawing?" And she said yes to sitting here again. Jake looked down at his notebook, where his spacecraft design was still visible. Maybe Nick was right. Maybe Zara really was interested in his drawings, and maybe she really did want to sit with them again, for the first time in months. Jake felt like he might actually have something to look forward to at school. 3 weeks had passed since Zara first sat at Jake's table, and she had returned every day since. What started as polite conversation had slowly grown into something that felt like real friendship. Jake found himself looking forward to lunch more than any other part of his day. "So this is called a hamburger," Jake explained, holding up his lunch. "It's basically meat between 2 pieces of bread with vegetables." Zara studied the food carefully. "And this is considered normal food?" "For humans? Pretty normal, yeah." "What do you usually eat on your planet?" "Mostly protein supplements and nutrient bars," Zara said. "Very efficient, but not very ... interesting." Jake watched as she took a careful bite of her own hamburger. Her face showed surprise, then something that looked like pleasure. "It's actually quite good," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Wait until you try pizza," Casey said from across the table. "That's when you'll really understand human food." Jake had noticed that Zara was getting more comfortable around them. She smiled more often now, and sometimes she even laughed at Nick's jokes. But there were still moments when she seemed to disappear into herself, like she was thinking about something far away. "Jake, can I ask you something?" Zara said after Nick and Casey had left for their next class. "Sure," Jake replied, gathering his books. "Why do you draw spaceships? Do you want to be an astronaut?" Jake felt his usual embarrassment about his dreams, but something about Zara's question seemed genuine. "I want to join the Earth Space Corps," he said quietly. "I know it's probably stupid. I'm not brave enough or smart enough, but I've always wanted to explore space." "Why do you think you're not smart enough?" Zara asked. "Your designs are very advanced. Some of the concepts you've drawn are actually quite sophisticated." Jake looked at her in surprise. "Really? You understand the designs?" "I've studied engineering," Zara said quickly. "On my planet, we learn about many different technologies." There was something in her voice that made Jake curious, but he didn't want to push. Instead, he pulled out his notebook and showed her his latest drawing. "I've been working on this one," he said. "It's supposed to be a faster way to travel between star systems." Zara studied the drawing carefully, her violet eyes moving across the lines and calculations. "This is very good," she said finally. "But have you considered adjusting the power distribution here?" She pointed to a section of the engine design. Jake looked where she was pointing. "I hadn't thought of that. You think it would work better?" "It should increase efficiency by at least 20%, Zara said confidently. Jake stared at her. "How do you know that?" Zara's face went carefully blank. "I've always been good with numbers," she said. "My people are naturally gifted with mathematics and engineering." It was a reasonable explanation, but Jake had the feeling there was more to it. Still, he was too excited about the design improvement to worry about it too much after school. Jake and Zara had started spending time together in the library. Zara helped him with his physics homework, and Jake helped her understand human social customs. It was during one of these study sessions that Jake began to notice how unusual Zara really was. They were sitting at a table in the back corner, working on a project about communication systems. Jake had gone to get a book from the top shelf, but it was too high for him to reach. Before he could ask for help, Zara had stood up and easily lifted the heavy book down. "Thanks," Jake said, but he was staring at her. The book had to weigh at least 20 pounds, but she had lifted it like it was nothing. "You're welcome," Zara said. Sitting back down as if nothing unusual had happened, Jake tried to focus on his work, but he kept thinking about how strong she was. He had also noticed that she never seemed to get tired, even after long study sessions. And her handwriting was perfect, like she had been trained to write with precision. A few days later, Jake was walking to his car after school when he heard voices from behind the gym. He recognized one of them as Danny Rogers, the biggest bully in school. Jake's heart sank when he realized Danny was probably picking on some younger student. "Please leave me alone," Jake heard someone say. The voice was familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Come on, Space Girl." Danny's voice was mean and mocking. "Show us some of those alien tricks. Can you fly? Can you shoot lasers from your eyes?" Jake felt his stomach drop. Danny was bothering Zara. Jake knew he should walk away. Danny was twice his size and had a reputation for violence. But something made him step around the corner of the building. Zara was standing with her back to the wall, facing Danny and two of his friends. She looked calm, but Jake could see tension in her shoulders. "I don't want any trouble," Zara said quietly. "Too bad," Danny said, stepping closer. "I think it's time someone taught you aliens your place." Jake's fear was replaced by anger. Before he could think about what he was doing, he stepped forward. "Hey, Danny, leave her alone," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. Danny turned around, surprised. Well, Jake Morrison, coming to save his alien girlfriend. How sweet." "She's not my girlfriend," Jake said, his face getting red. She's just my friend, and you need to leave her alone. Danny laughed. Or what? You'll fight me? Jake knew he couldn't fight Danny, but he also knew he couldn't just walk away and leave Zara alone with these bullies. I'll report you to Principal Davis, Jake said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Oh, I'm so scared, Danny said sarcastically. He turned back to Zara. Your little boyfriend can't protect you, alien girl. What happened next was so fast that Jake almost missed it. Danny reached out to grab Zara's arm, but somehow she wasn't there anymore. Instead, Danny was on the ground, looking confused and holding his wrist. I said I don't want any trouble, Zara repeated, her voice still calm. But somehow different now. There was something in her tone that made even Danny's friends step back. You broke my wrist, Danny said, his voice high with pain. It's not broken, Zara said matter-of-factly. But it will be sore for a few days. I suggest you use that time to think about how you treat other people. Danny scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. This isn't over, he said, but he was already backing away. Yes, it is, Zara said simply. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Danny stop walking. You will not bother me again. You will not bother Jake again. And you will not bother any other students who are smaller than you. Do you understand? Danny stared at her for a moment, then nodded quickly. He and his friends hurried away, leaving Jake and Zara alone. How did you do that? Jake asked, his voice full of amazement. Self-defense classes, Zara said quickly. My parents insisted I learn before coming to Earth. It was another reasonable explanation, but Jake was starting to notice that all of Zara's explanations sounded a little too perfect. Still, he was grateful that she had been able to handle the situation. Thank you, Jake said. You didn't have to help me. Yes, I did, Zara said, and her voice was softer now. You were trying to help me, even though you were scared. That was very brave. Jake felt his cheeks get warm. I wasn't that brave. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Zara said. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. They walked to the parking lot together, and Jake found himself looking at Zara with new eyes. There was definitely more to her than she was telling him, but he was beginning to realize that he didn't care what secrets she was hiding. She was a good friend, and she had stood up for him when no one else would. Zara, Jake said as they reached his car. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you really just an exchange student? Zara was quiet for a long moment. What do you think? She asked finally. Jake studied her face, looking for clues. I think you're much more than you're pretending to be, he said honestly. But I also think you're a good person, and that's what matters to me. Zara smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, it looked completely genuine. Thank you, Jake. That means more to me than you know. As Jake drove home, he thought about everything that had happened. Zara was strong, probably stronger than anyone he had ever met. She was smart, much smarter than most adults he knew. And she moved like someone who had been trained to fight, but she was also kind, and she had become his friend when no one else would. Whatever secrets she was keeping, Jake was pretty sure they didn't change the fact that she was one of the best people he had ever known. He was looking forward to tomorrow's lunch period more than ever. The annual Lincoln High Science Fair was the biggest event of the spring semester. Jake had been working on his project for weeks, and with Zara's help, he had created something he was actually proud of. Their quantum communication array was far more advanced than anything he could have built on his own. Are you nervous? Zara asked as they set up their display in the gymnasium. A little, Jake admitted, adjusting the small device they had built together. I've never had a project this good before. It is very good, Zara said, checking the connections one more time. The design is solid and the theory is sound. You should be proud. Jake looked around the gymnasium at all the other projects. There were the usual volcano displays and plant growth experiments, but there were also some impressive engineering projects from the advanced students. Near the back corner, he spotted Luna Park setting up her display about atmospheric processors. Luna was quiet like Jake, but in a different way. She seemed to watch everything around her with careful attention, similar to how Zara behaved. Jake had noticed that Zara and Luna sometimes exchanged glances across the cafeteria, though they never sat together. "Luna's project looks interesting," Jake said. Pointing toward her display, Zara followed his gaze and her expression became more serious. "Yes, she's very talented. Do you know her well?" "We've spoken a few times," Zara said carefully. "She's from my region." Jake had noticed that Zara always gave vague answers when asked about her home planet or other aliens at school. He had learned not to push too hard, but he was still curious. Parents and community members began arriving for the fair. Jake watched as families moved through the displays, looking at the various projects. He noticed several adults who didn't seem to be parents. They wore dark suits and moved through the crowd differently than the families did. "Those men," Jake said quietly to Zara. "Do you see them?" Zara followed his gaze to the men in suits. Her entire body seemed to become more alert. "Yes, I see them. They don't look like parents." "No, they don't," Zara agreed, her voice tight. Jake watched as the men moved through the crowd. They weren't looking at the science projects. Instead, they seemed to be scanning the faces of students and adults. When one of them looked in their direction, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Zara, what's going on?" Jake asked before Zara could answer. Principal Davis's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat today. One of our exchange students, Luna Park, will be giving a presentation about her home planet's environmental technology." Jake looked toward Luna's display and saw her standing beside it, looking uncomfortable with the attention. The men in suits had also turned toward her, and Jake noticed they were moving in her direction. "We need to leave," Zara said suddenly, grabbing Jake's arm. "What? Why? The fair just started. Jake, please." "We need to go now." There was something in Zara's voice that Jake had never heard before. She sounded scared, and that frightened him more than anything else. "Okay," Jake said, not understanding but trusting her. "Let's go." They had barely taken 2 steps when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting strange shadows across the gymnasium. Jake heard several people gasp and someone screamed. "Stay close to me," Zara said, her voice now completely different. It was calm and commanding, like she was used to giving orders in dangerous situations. Jake heard the gymnasium doors slam shut, and then he saw them. Men in black clothing with weapons were coming through the emergency exits. They weren't the same men in suits from before. These were different, more dangerous looking. "Everyone on the ground," one of the armed men shouted. Now, most of the people in the gymnasium dropped to the floor, but Jake was too shocked to move. He watched in horror as the armed men spread out through the room, clearly looking for something or someone. "Jake, get down," Zara hissed, pulling him toward the floor behind their display table. From their hiding spot, Jake could see the armed men moving toward Luna's display. Luna was still standing there, but she didn't look scared anymore. She looked angry. "That's far enough," Luna said, her voice carrying across the gymnasium despite the chaos. One of the armed men raised his weapon toward her. "Princess Luna, you're coming with us." "Princess?" Jake's mind reeled. Luna was a princess? What happened next was like something out of an action movie. Zara suddenly stood up from behind their table, and Jake saw that she had a weapon in her hands. Where had that come from? "Stand down," Zara commanded, her voice filled with authority. "You're surrounded." The armed men turned toward her, but Zara was already moving. She moved faster than Jake had ever seen anyone move, diving and rolling behind another table as the men began shooting. Jake pressed himself against the floor, his heart pounding. Around him, he could hear people screaming and crying. But above it all, he could hear Zara's voice, calm and professional, like she was used to this kind of situation. "Luna, get to the exit," Zara called out. "I'll cover you." "I'm not leaving without you," Luna replied. And Jake was surprised to hear that she also sounded like she knew how to handle a fight. Jake watched from his hiding spot as Zara and Luna worked together to fight off the armed men. They moved like a team, like they had trained together. Zara's movements were precise and deadly. While Luna seemed to be protecting the civilians in the room, it was clear that both girls were much more than they had pretended to be. Jake's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His quiet friend Zara was fighting like a soldier, and Luna, the shy student from his physics class, was apparently a princess. The fight lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours to Jake. When it was over, the armed men were either unconscious or fleeing. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer. Zara came over to where Jake was still hiding behind the table. She was breathing hard, and there was a cut on her cheek, but she seemed otherwise unhurt. "Are you okay?" she asked, helping him to his feet. Jake stared at her. She was still holding the weapon, and there was something about the way she stood that was completely different from the shy exchange student he thought he knew. "Who are you?" Jake asked quietly. Zara looked at him for a long moment, then looked around the gymnasium. People were slowly getting to their feet, and Jake could see that several of them were looking at Zara and Luna with shock and confusion. "My name is Commander Zara Veltar," she said finally. "I'm a member of the Royal Catherian Guard." "Royal Guard?" Jake repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "My job is to protect her," Zara said, nodding toward Luna, who was helping an elderly man to his feet. "Princess Luna of Kithura." Jake felt like the world was spinning around him. "You're not an exchange student." "No," Zara said quietly. "I'm not." "So everything you told me was a lie?" Zara's face showed pain. "Not everything. My friendship with you is real, Jake. That was never a lie." Jake backed away from her. "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't. My mission was to protect the princess while she attended your school. No one was supposed to know who we really were." "Mission?" Jake felt betrayed and confused. "So I was just part of your cover story?" "No," Zara said firmly. "Jake, you have to believe me. What we have is real. I never expected to become friends with anyone here but you." "But I what?" Jake asked, his voice getting louder. "I was convenient. I was the perfect lonely kid to help you blend in." "That's not true," Zara said, stepping toward him. Jake moved away from her. Just don't." The police were entering the gymnasium now, and Jake could see that more people in suits were coming in with them. These ones looked official, probably government agents. "Jake, please," Zara said. "Let me explain." But Jake was already walking away. He pushed through the crowd of people and officials, heading for the exit. He heard Zara call his name, but he didn't turn around. Outside, Jake sat in his car and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Zara wasn't who she said she was. She was some kind of alien soldier and Luna was a princess? The quiet friendship he had treasured was built on lies. Jake thought about all the times Zara had helped him, all the conversations they had shared, all the moments when he had felt like he finally had a real friend. Had any of it been real? He started his car and drove home, leaving the chaos of the science fair behind him. But he couldn't leave behind the hurt and confusion that filled his chest. He had trusted Zara, and she had lied to him about everything. As he pulled into his driveway, Jake realized that he didn't know what to think anymore. The person he had grown to care about didn't really exist. Commander Zara Veltar was a stranger, and Jake didn't know if he could ever trust her again. But even as he felt angry and betrayed, he couldn't forget the look in her eyes when she said their friendship was real. Despite everything, part of him wanted to believe her. 3 weeks had passed since the science fair attack, and Jake had not spoken to Zara once. Every day at lunch he sat with Nick and Casey at their usual table, but he kept his eyes on his food. He could feel Zara watching him from across the cafeteria, but he refused to look in her direction. "You're being stupid," Casey said one day, putting down her sandwich with frustration. "She saved everyone at that science fair." "She lied to me," Jake replied, not looking up from his notebook. He had been drawing again, but his spacecraft designs were different now. They were darker, more aggressive-looking. She was doing her job, Nick added. What was she supposed to do? Tell everyone she was a royal guard? Jake finally looked up at his friends. "She was supposed to trust me." "Maybe she wanted to," Casey said gently. "Maybe she couldn't." Jake went back to his drawing. He had been having the same argument with Nick and Casey for weeks, and he was tired of it. They didn't understand how it felt to think you had a real friend, only to discover that everything about that friendship was based on lies. But late at night, when Jake was alone in his room, he sometimes thought about the look in Zara's eyes when she said their friendship was real. He remembered how she had helped him with his designs, how she had stood up to Danny and his friends, how she had seemed genuinely interested in his dreams of joining the Space Corps. Had all of that been fake? Jake wanted to believe it was, because that would make his anger easier to justify. But deep down, he wasn't sure. Jake had also been thinking about what had happened at the science fair. The way Zara had fought, the way she had protected everyone in the room, the way she had worked with Luna to stop the attackers. She had risked her own safety to save people she barely knew. One afternoon, Jake was walking home from school when he overheard his father talking on the phone in the kitchen. His father worked for the government, something to do with alien relations, and Jake usually didn't pay attention to his work calls. But this time, he heard something that made him stop. Yes, I understand the situation, his father was saying. But canceling the graduation ceremony seems like an overreaction. Jake moved closer to the kitchen door, trying to hear more. Another attack? When? His father continued. And you're sure the target is the princess? Jake's heart started beating faster. They were talking about Luna and about another attack. I see, his father said. Well, if the intelligence is reliable, then we don't have much choice. The princess will have to return to her home planet immediately. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If Luna had to leave, that meant Zara would probably leave too. And if there was going to be another attack, that meant people could get hurt. No, I understand, his father continued. The graduation ceremony is too public, too many variables. We can't guarantee her safety. Jake heard his father ending the call, and he quickly moved away from the kitchen. He went to his room and sat on his bed thinking about what he had heard. There was going to be another attack, and the government was planning to cancel graduation and send Luna and Zara away. Jake thought about Luna, who had seemed to enjoy her time at Lincoln High despite the danger. He thought about all the other students who were looking forward to graduation. And he thought about Zara, who would have to leave without them ever talking again. For the first time in weeks, Jake realized that his anger might be less important than the bigger picture. People were in danger, and he might be able to help. That evening, Jake did something he hadn't done in weeks. He looked up Zara's contact information and sent her a message. Can we talk? The response came back almost immediately. Yes, where? Library. Tomorrow after school. I'll be there. Jake spent the rest of the evening thinking about what he wanted to say. He was still hurt and angry, but he was also scared about what might happen if he didn't try to help. The next day, Jake could barely concentrate on his classes. When the final bell rang, he made his way to the library, his stomach full of nervous energy. Zara was already there, sitting at their usual table in the back corner. She looked tired, and Jake noticed that she seemed more alert than usual, constantly glancing around the room. Thank you for coming, she said quietly as Jake sat down. I heard my father talking, Jake said without preamble. There's going to be another attack. Zara's expression became more serious. What did you hear? They're planning to cancel graduation and send you and Luna away, Jake said. The government thinks it's too dangerous. Zara nodded slowly. We received similar intelligence. The attackers are planning something bigger this time? At graduation? Yes, they know Luna is supposed to give a speech about human-alien cooperation. They want to stop her and send a message that aliens aren't welcome on Earth. Jake looked at Zara's face, seeing the stress and worry she was carrying. Are you scared? Yes, Zara admitted. Not for myself, but for Luna, and for all the people who could get hurt. Jake was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Zara sighed. Because I was trained to trust no one. My whole life I've been taught that revealing secrets gets people killed. When I became your friend, I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you would look at me differently. Afraid that you would see me as a weapon instead of a person. Zara's voice was soft. I like being just Zara with you, not Commander Veltar. Jake studied her face, looking for signs of deception. but all he saw was honesty and sadness. I was hurt, Jake said finally. I thought our friendship was real, but it felt like everything was a lie. Our friendship was real, Zara said firmly. That was the only real thing in my life here. Everything else was duty and mission and pretending. But when I was with you, I could just be myself. Jake felt some of his anger beginning to fade. So what happens now? Do you and Luna just disappear? Unless we can find a way to stop the attack, Zara said. But my superiors don't think it's possible. They want to evacuate us immediately. Jake thought about what he had overheard his father saying. What if there was a way to stop it? What do you mean? I know this school better than anyone, Jake said slowly. I know all the hiding places, all the secret passages, all the ways to get around without being seen. I know how students think. And move, Zara looked at him with surprise. Jake, this is dangerous. These aren't school bullies. These are people who want to hurt or kill Luna. I know, Jake said. But if I don't help, Luna has to leave and never come back. And you have to leave too. And that matters to you? Jake looked at her for a long moment. Yes, it matters. Despite everything, you're still my friend. And I believe in what Luna is trying to do. Humans and aliens should be working together, not fighting each other. Zara was quiet for several minutes. It would be very dangerous, she said finally. And I can't promise that we would succeed, but we'd have a chance? Maybe. My team has been studying the school's layout, but we don't understand the social dynamics the way you do. We don't know how students behave during large events. Jake felt a spark of excitement, the same feeling he got when he was working on a particularly challenging engineering problem. What would I have to do? Help us predict how the attackers might move through the school. Help us understand the crowd patterns during graduation. Help us identify the best places to position security. And in return, Luna gets to stay and finish her mission. The graduation ceremony happens as planned. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we prove that humans and aliens can work together to solve problems. Jake thought about all the reasons he should say no. It was dangerous, it was probably crazy, and he was just a high school student. But he also thought about Luna's speech about cooperation, about Zara's dedication to protecting people, and about his own dreams of being part of something bigger than himself. Okay, Jake said finally. I'll help you. Zara smiled for the first time since he had sat down. Thank you, Jake. This means more than you know. Just promise me one thing, Jake said. What? No more lies. If we're going to work together, I need to know the truth about everything. I promise, Zara said solemnly. No more lies. Jake reached across the table and shook her hand. Then let's save graduation. The morning of graduation day arrived with perfect weather. Jake sat in his car in the school parking lot, watching families arrive with flowers and cameras. Everything looked normal, but he knew it wasn't. Hidden throughout the school were Zara's security team, and somewhere out there were the people who wanted to hurt Luna. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Zara. Are you ready? He typed back, as ready as I'll ever be. For the past week, Jake had worked with Zara and her team to plan the security for graduation. He had shown them the school's maintenance tunnels, the storage rooms, and all the places where someone could hide. He had explained how students and families moved through the building during big events, and where crowds would be thickest. Most importantly, Jake had remembered something that the security team had overlooked. The maintenance tunnels connected to the old fallout shelter under the school. It was a route that very few people knew about, but Jake had discovered it years ago when he was hiding from bullies. If I were planning an attack, Jake had told Zara, I would come through the tunnels. No one would see me coming, and I could get right under the auditorium. Now, as Jake walked toward the school building, he hoped he was wrong. But he had a sick feeling in his stomach that told him he wasn't. The graduation ceremony was being held in the main auditorium, with Luna scheduled to give her speech right after the principal's opening remarks. Jake took his seat in the section reserved for family members, even though he wasn't graduating. Zara had given him a small communication device that looked like a hearing aid. Can you hear me? Zara's voice came through the device clearly. Yes. Jake whispered, pretending to cough. Good, Luna is backstage and my team is in position. How do the crowd patterns look? Jake looked around the auditorium. Families were still arriving, but most of the seats were full. Normal so far. People are sitting where you predicted they would. Excellent. Keep watching for anything unusual. Jake settled back in his seat and tried to look like a normal family member. But his eyes kept moving, watching for anything that didn't belong. He spotted several of Zara's team members scattered throughout the audience. All dressed like parents or older siblings, Principal Davis took the stage and began his opening remarks. Jake tried to listen, but his attention was focused on the exits and the areas where Zara had said attackers might appear. Now, Principal Davis said, I'd like to introduce our special guest speaker, exchange student Luna Park, who will share some thoughts about cooperation and friendship between different peoples. Luna walked onto the stage wearing a simple blue dress and looking nervous. Jake felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was probably scared, but she was still going to give her speech because she believed it was important. Thank you, Principal Davis, Luna began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. When I first came to Lincoln High, I was afraid. I was different, and I didn't know if I would be accepted. Jake found himself actually listening to her words. She was talking about feeling like an outsider, about finding friendship in unexpected places, about learning that differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses. But I learned something important here, Luna continued. I learned that kindness and courage exist in every species, in every person. I learned that working together, we can accomplish things that none of us could do alone. That's when Jake heard it. A small sound, barely audible over Luna's voice. It was coming from somewhere below the auditorium, and it sounded like metal. Scraping against concrete. Zara, Jake whispered. Something's happening in the tunnels. Are you sure? Yes, I can hear movement below the stage. There was a pause, then Zara's voice came back, more urgent. Jake, I need you to get out of the auditorium, now. What about everyone else? My team will handle the evacuation, but I need you to do something for me. Can you get to the maintenance entrance? Jake knew she was talking about the door that led to the tunnel system. Yes, but why? Because you're the only one who knows those tunnels well enough to intercept them. I'm sending 2 of my team members to meet you there. Jake's heart started pounding. You want me to go down there? I need you to guide my people through the tunnels. They don't know the layout like you do? Jake looked around the auditorium. Luna was still giving her speech, and the audience was listening intently. They had no idea what was about to happen. Okay, Jake said, standing up. I'm going. Jake made his way to the side exit, trying to look casual. Once he was in the hallway, he moved quickly toward the maintenance area. 2 people in janitor uniforms were waiting for him by the tunnel entrance. You're Jake? One of them asked. Yes. I'm Agent Kim, and this is Agent Ross. Commander Veltar says you know these tunnels. Jake nodded, opening the heavy metal door. Follow me and stay quiet. Sound carries down here. The tunnels were dark and narrow, lit only by emergency lights every few feet. Jake led the 2 agents through the maze of passages, moving toward the area directly under the auditorium. As they got closer, Jake could hear voices ahead. He held up his hand, and the agents stopped behind him. There, Jake whispered, pointing toward a junction ahead. They're coming from the old shelter entrance. Agent Kim spoke into her radio. We have visual on the targets, at least 4 individuals, all armed. Jake heard Zara's voice through his earpiece. Jake, you need to get out of there now. Wait, Jake whispered. I can hear what they're saying. Jake crept closer to the junction, straining to listen. The attackers were talking about their plan, and what he heard made his blood run cold. The explosive device is in position, one of them was saying. When the alien girl is halfway through her speech, we trigger it. The whole stage will collapse. What about the humans in the audience? Another voice asked. Necessary casualties. This will show them what happens when they welcome aliens to Earth. Jake felt sick. They weren't just planning to hurt Luna. They were planning to hurt everyone in the auditorium. Jake, get out of there. Zara's voice was urgent in his ear, but Jake was looking at the tunnel layout and he realized something. The attackers were taking the long way around because they didn't know about the shortcut. If he could get ahead of them, he might be able to warn Zara's team about the explosive device. "I know another way," Jake whispered to the agents. "I can get ahead of them." "Absolutely not," Agent Kim said firmly. "You're a civilian." "But the only one who knows the shortcut," Jake argued. "By the time you go around, it'll be too late," Jake made a decision. Before the agents could stop him, he slipped away into a side passage that they hadn't seen. He heard Agent Kim curse behind him, but he was already moving. The shortcut was narrow and difficult, but Jake had used it many times when he was younger. He crawled through a section that was barely wide enough for his shoulders, then dropped down into a lower tunnel. He could hear the attackers ahead of him now, much closer than before. Jake crept forward until he could see them. There were 4 men, all carrying weapons and equipment. One of them was holding a device that looked like a remote control. Jake spoke into his earpiece as quietly as possible. "Zara, they have a bomb under the stage. One of them has a remote control. Where exactly?" Jake looked around, trying to orient himself. "Right under the center of the stage. They're going to trigger it during Luna's speech." "We're evacuating the auditorium now," Zara said. "Can you see which one has the remote?" Jake studied the group. The tall one on the left. "He's got it in his right hand." "Okay, Jake, I need you to do something very important. When I give the signal, I need you to make noise. Lots of noise. We need to distract them while my team moves in." "What kind of noise?" "Anything. Yell, bang on the pipes, whatever you can." "Do." Jake looked around the tunnel. There were water pipes running along the ceiling, and he could see some loose tools that had been left behind by maintenance workers. "I can do that," Jake said. "Good. Wait for my signal." Jake waited, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the attackers would hear it. He could hear Luna's voice echoing down from the auditorium above, still giving her speech. "Now," Zara's voice said. Jake grabbed a metal wrench and began banging it against the water pipes as hard as he could. The noise was deafening in the confined space, and the attackers spun around in confusion. "What the hell was that?" one of them shouted. That's when Zara's team struck. Jake heard the sound of weapons firing, but they weren't the loud gunshots he expected. They were quieter, like air guns. The fight was over in seconds. All 4 attackers were on the ground, unconscious but breathing. Agent Kim appeared beside Jake, looking both impressed and annoyed. "That was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave." She said, "Did we get them all?" Jake asked. "Yes, and we found the explosive device. It's been disarmed." Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. "Is everyone safe?" "Everyone's safe," Zara's voice said in his ear. "The auditorium has been evacuated as a precaution," but Luna finished her speech. "You did it, Jake." An hour later, Jake was sitting in Principal Davis's office, being debriefed by government agents. Zara was there too, back in her commander uniform instead of her student clothes. "You realize you could have been killed," Agent Kim was saying. "What you did was incredibly dangerous." "But it worked," Jake said simply. "Yes, it worked," Zara agreed. "And it wouldn't have worked without you. You saved a lot of lives today."